Ladies and gents, it's time for our pre and post testing for season 23. Now we're gonna just touch on exotic weapons today, which was actually quite a few of them. Not just the ones that Bungie called out, but the ones that were also affected by these blanket changes. For instance, even though Quicksilver Storm wasn't even mentioned once in the sandbox patch notes, it got a buff alongside the auto rifle buff, which also translates to its grenade launcher alternate form also getting a buff. Little things like this, guys, that we wanted to just pre and post test on. But if you want to just skip to the weapon that you like to use, down below we have timestamps for everything. But to kick things off, we have Vex Mythoclast. Dude, this exotic got like 3 different buffs. First, Bungie increased the damage versus minor enemies, that being red bar enemies, by 10%. They also increased the damage against bosses by 25% and against champions by 200% in its linear fusion rifle form. Now, these are the pre and post damage values. Now understand, guys, that 10% buff against red bar enemies and 25% buff against bosses, that's not only in the base fire form, but also in that linear fusion fire form. Look at the linear damage increasing pre versus post, especially that boss damage, jumping up from 40 to now 50,000 per crit. But the big one is the linear fusion rifle damage versus champions. Pre values, it was hitting 24,508 damage. Post, 73,526 damage per crit. And you see the body shot damage increases as well. Now keep in mind, this is just in its linear form, as in its base fire mode is the same versus champions, pre versus post. Guys, it's safe to say Vex Mythoclast is nasty. Inside of a Legend Nightfall, Vex was doing about half of a champion's health bar in one shot. And this is without Radiance or any debuffs or buffs, no synergy from the artifact mod whatsoever. This is Vex Mythoclast all on its own. It is a melt machine. And with the right build, which we're going to be going over in the next few days, Vex Mythoclast will be melting. Next, we have Revision 0. Bungie increased damage versus champions by 100%. Now, this is with our Vorpal mode. You can see the pre and post damage values here, but all forms of Revision 0 benefit from the buff here. It's light burst mode, it's heavy burst mode, it's sniper rifle mode, everything got that 100% damage buff. Now, again, this is just against champions, but the difference between Revision 0 and Vex Mythoclast is that Vex Mythoclast requires you to get kills in order to charge that linear shots, whereas Revision, similar to like Quicksilver Storm, really just requires sustained damage, and for Revision here, requires that damage to be precision hits. Now, the general pulse buff that we're going to be covering later in this video also assists in making this weapon more desirable to use. Now look, I'm not going to jump up and say that Revision 0 is the meta, but it is doing a lot more damage. Next, we have Thorn. Bungie actually made multiple changes here. First up, picking up a remnant can overflow the magazine up to 40 rounds. And this does not require the catalyst. That's just a base benefit within the exotic itself. The catalyst, though, gives it stat bumps, including plus 20 range, plus 10 stability, but also getting kills or picking up a remnant grants additional range, handling, and mobility. Guys, we're going to be playing with Thorn more, and we're probably going to do a live review of it, but you're going to see a lot of this weapon this season. This buff turned out exactly how PvP players imagined. Its pre-range at base was 30 to 31 meters, which again is still much better than what Thorn was doing before the range buff last season. But the post range, that plus 20 range roughly equals 34.5 meters. That is a big jump in range here for Thorn. On top of that, when you pick up a remnant, not only are you overflowing the mag, but it appears it gives it close to an extra meter of range. And when testing this, we were roughly hitting around 35.5 meters. Now, some things that's actually being overlooked in this exotic catalyst. One being that plus 10 stability. It's really nice, guys. The other being the extra handling that you get when getting a kill or picking up a remnant. Again, base Thorn already felt so good, but now it feels meta. Now, for those wondering, the remnant will give you 4 rounds back and can overflow Thorn to 40 rounds total. My only complaint about Thorn right now is the ornament. No lie, this ornament is pay to win. It makes the gun model literally smaller, which allows for you to see more of your screen and for your follow-up shots to be easier to land. It's a subtle thing. We've seen this before in the past with certain ornaments. On top of that, it's just too damn sexy. Now, for those wondering, where do you get the Thorn Catalyst? It drops from ritual playlists, literally Gambit, Crucible, or Vanguard. It's an RNG drop post-game or post-activity completion. Some folks were coming by the stream and said they got it in their first game. Others, like myself, took all afternoon to get it. However, this catalyst is definitely worth the grind. Next, we have Osteo Striga. Bungie removed the SMG damage bonus scaler that was affecting the poison damage. Now, this brings Osteo Striga poison down to match standard necrotic grip poison. Now, keep in mind, as an exotic, it will still deal 40% bonus damage against minors. Now, we were questioning how much worse Osteo was going to be. be post-nerf. Now, from the pre and post damage values, you can see this, guys. We're talking minus 47% damage against red bars, this being that tick damage, minus 34% damage against Carl, and you can also see the necrotic combo here, pre versus post. Now, the damage on paper, it's hefty, guys, and you will be feeling this nerf. With that being said, though, I do want to remind you that Osteo and necrotic grips is still such an excellent combo. The synergy here is still so good, and what this really allows is for you to use other things with necrotic grips. We know we're gonna get a buff to Necrochasm. We also have Thorn, which just got a Catalyst, and a rework, making it a better contender inside of PvE. Now that Osteo has been pulled back a bit, those weapons have a chance to shine in combination with necrotic grips. With that being said, though, Osteo and necrotic is still a fantastic combo. Now, let's talk glaives. Bungie did a lot of changes here, guys. They increased projectile speed for our glaives by 30%, increased projectile damage in PvE by 25%, also decreased projectile damage in PvP across multiple archetypes. The main takeaway for this is how does this affect our exotic glaives? Considering your glaive shield will now passively recharge at a rate of 1% per second, which takes us to our exotic class glaives. Now, they grant 1 ammo when you activate perk, so you can literally use it even if you're out of ammo. They no longer passively drain shield energy when you special reload to activate the perk, and no longer deactivated by reloading or stowing the weapon. Now, I want to start with the Edge of Intent. This is the Warlock Glaive. Bungie changed the effect of the healing turret projectile to grant cure and provide restoration. They also did things like increase the AoE radius to 8 meters to benefit more allies, increase the mag size from 4 to 5. You can see the damage values increasing because of the overall glaive buff against red bars and against Carl, equating to about a 25% increase in damage. Again, this is when you shoot the weapon. I think the main question is how does this feel for the healing turret itself? Honestly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, it actually felt pretty good. Granted, this is just here at Carl, but I was not dying while standing near the turrets, and would then send a seeker out, giving me cure and restoration as soon as the timers would finish on the last set. Now, for all class glaives, it's confirmed here, the perk no longer deactivates when stowing or reloading weapons. It no longer passively drains shield energy when in alt fire mode, and it does generate 1 ammo when activating the exotic perk. Now, Edge of Action. This is the Titan exotic glaive. Passing through the bubble now grants bonus reload speed, handling, and a small amount of stacking bonus damage in addition to the overshield. Also, Bungie reduced the health of the bubble from 8,000 hit points to 2,400 to account for the increased uptime and improved effects. Now, its overall projectile damage buff was a 21% increase against red bars and Carl, but just some of my post-buff thoughts here. Despite the big nerf to the hit points for the shield, it does still feel pretty tanky. Granted, the real test is probably going to be in things like GMs. The main thing is that uptime is way higher, which feels really good. Now, what about the bonus damage that you get when passing in the bubble? It's actually a 5% increase in damage, which I know is not necessarily a big buff. I wish it was more, but considering that the uptime is so much higher, I guess that's the balancing act there. Now, it still synergizes with things like Helm of Saint 14, as it will blind enemies who pass through the bubble. Now, Edge of Concurrence. This is the Hunter exotic glaive. The Lightning Seeker now jolts targets on impact. Now, Bungie reduced the direct hit damage of Lightning Seeker to account for the free ammo granted. Now, you can see here the buff pre versus post is about an 18% increase, or roughly like 18.5%. Now, Bungie mentioned in the patch notes that they reduced the direct damage of Lightning Seeker. However, in our testing, it doesn't appear to be nerfed. It still does 122,950 damage versus red bars and 81,967 damage against Carl. Now, it's applying jolts, and honestly, feels pretty good. And I'm really hoping that Bungie doesn't reduce the direct hit damage of Lightning Seeker. Hopefully that's not the case. Maybe that was just something they meant for PvP or something. But for PvE, that damage is still the same, and it's applying jolts. Now, what about our other exotic glaives? Vexcalibur did benefit from the general glaive change, which was around an 18% increase in damage. Winterbite. Bungie increased the detonation damage with a large projectile by 25%, with the self-damage blast radius being halved. The main takeaway from this is, yes, there is a 25% increase in damage, but that self-damage feels way more manageable. Can't tell you how many times I've killed myself with Winterbites. Now, on to the big one, sniper rifles. Bungie increased sniper rifle PvE damage with a flat buff of 15%. Now, this also applies to exotic sniper rifles that use heavy ammo. Now, for Izanagi's Burden, you see the increase in damage, guys, pre versus post, honed edge times 4 even at 169,834 damage to now 195,963 damage. Now, previously, when Bungie would actually buff sniper rifles, they would leave honed edge off, but not this time. It too got a buff. Other sniper rifles that were touched here were, of course, things like Cloud Cloud Strike, Borealis, Darcy, Whisper of the Worm, which is doing a hefty amount of damage. Needless to say, guys, we will be doing damage testing very soon, like probably today, on sniper rifles. I have got to see how they stack in the meta. Now, something we did test was Revision 0 sniper rifle form also affected by the sniper rifle buff. It was not. Again, it still got the pulse rifle buff, but the sniper itself did not receive this buff. Now, a couple things that was really interesting throughout this testing. Cloud Strike's lightning seems to have increased in damage with the buff. So it's not just the sniper rifle itself. And I actually think that Whisper and Cloud Strike is going to see a spike in popularity this season. Granted, it really just depends on what you're hitting, right? Like the encounter itself, who are you doing damage to? Like that right there is normally the deciding factor of what you use. But we will be doing our seasonal DPS testing, which will include sniper rifles, which has been something we've kind of left off the list now for quite some time. So I'm very happy to see this buff. Outside of that, all of our other sniper rifle archetypes also were affected by this buff, not just the exotics, guys. Rapid fires, both in the kinetic and energy slots, adaptives, aggressives. Again, lots of sniper rifles. We're going to be DPS testing very soon. Moving on to auto rifles. Bungie increased damage against minor red bar combatants by 10%. Now, we knew this was going to affect so many auto rifles, especially our exotic auto rifles. Weapons like Sweet Business, Sura's Regime, Monte Carlo, Necrochasm, Hard Light, Tommy's Matchbook, Centrifuge, they all got buffs, including all of our legendary auto rifles. Now, interestingly enough, Quicksilver Storm got the buff against red bar enemies, but also its grenade launcher and nano rockets also got a buff. Now, I know, you're probably like, Cross, it's red bars, what does it matter? Well, things like GMs, where everything is just so much tankier, even red bar ads, having that extra damage is really nice. So I was happy to see the buff transfer there. Now, for Monte Carlo, did receive that buff everywhere except in its bayonets. Pre was doing 157,786 damage. Post, it is still doing the same. So no, it did not see a buff there. Moving on, we have pulse rifles. Bungie increased damage against minor red bar enemies and major orange bar enemy combatants by 12.5%. Guys, this affected everything. Exotics like Vigilance Wing, Outbreak Perfected. Yes, even the Sevi nanites on Outbreak Perfected. Bad Juju, No Time to Explain. Even the Time Chasm in No Time to Explain also got the buff. Little turret buddy, suckers putting out against red bars and orange bars. Revision 0 got a hefty buff in literally every category. It's light burst mode, it's heavy burst mode, it's sniper shot damage, and we're not even talking about Revision's original damage above against champions. This is just extra damage added on top of that. But other exotics like Grammaton Lance also got a buff. Collective Obligation also got a buff. And these were already two very, very good pulse rifles when it came to clearing out ads. And this season, guys, they just got a hell of a lot better. So that is our pre and post testing for everything. We have every intention of fleshing out some builds, especially for things like Vex Mythoclast and other weapons here that were really popping off. And we'll be throwing those together very soon. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, a like is very much appreciated. A lot of work gets put into these videos, so we would very much appreciate it. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.